Kohberger and his defense team have filed a motion to have cameras removed from the courtroom. The state has filed a response to Kohberger's motion agreeing that they want cameras removed from the courtroom, but for very different reasons. How do I know? Got the motions right here. I've redlined them for you. Let's get to work. Kohberger's lawyers have a hodgepodge of different legal arguments as to why they want the cameras removed from the courtroom. And the first instance they cite here is that the media has already violated, or alleged that they've already violated a prior court order as to what they can and can't show in the courtroom. What they can show in terms of their client, what they can't show in terms of their client. And they said that since the media has already violated that, that should be it. End of story. They can't be trusted. The court should, keep cameras out of the courtroom. But they know that's not enough, so they go on in their motion to cite certain instances that they want the court to consider. They start off by citing a United States Supreme Court case from 1965. It's called Estes versus State of Texas. And it basically states that you can't televise a trial if it's going to violate the defendant's due process rights. It's very broad, and we'll touch on that in a minute too. But what this motion really does is it gives you an insight, gives you some clues as to how the defense, how they see their own client, and how they know he's portrayed or how he looks to the public. How do I know? Well, let's read in the motion what they say about him. In the defense's own motion, they're showing pictures of Kohberger in the courtroom, and they're complaining that an article was written in the Daily Beast. Here it is, right in the motion right here. That an article was written in the Daily Beast that portrays Kohberger as being creepy. It's called, report says Kohberger's creepiness with women goes back to high school. The shoe fits, right? So Kohberger's defense team is saying because he can be portrayed as being creepy by some of the photos in the courtroom, cameras shouldn't be allowed in the courtroom. I don't think that's a very strong argument. I'll leave that up to you. Well, that's pretty good. This next argument is my personal favorite because the defense says the camera's continued exclusive focus on Mr. Kohberger provides fodder for observers and purported analysts on social media who are not bound by notions of journalistic integrity and who have potentially an even greater reach than traditional media outlets. The proliferation of these images and videos is plainly observable on social media platforms such as TikTok and posts such as those provided below. And they give you some posts here where they're saying basically like, what's he so happy about? Commenting on Kohberger's demeanor in the courtroom through photos that have been, provided by the media. They're saying that, hey, you can't let this happen. You can't let people like me, lawyer Mark, go on TikTok and do videos about this trial based on things that he sees in the courtroom because he'll use his, like I have all this influence that I'm going to push the narrative on this case. I'm just simply reading your motion, defense. Now look, as crazy as this is, it's the first time I'm seeing, first of all, it sounds crazy, right? But we have to step back with me for a minute and understand something that defense attorneys in this case, the public defenders and Taylor, they have to make this motion. I can't get upset with them for making it. I can sort of get on here and poke fun because I have to, because it's a little bit nuts. But they have to make this motion. They have to make all kinds of motions almost every day. Why? Because especially in a death penalty case, if you don't make motions now, then they're not preserved. That issue is not preserved for appeal. For example, if they don't make this motion to have cameras removed, they could never rely on it if later on as an issue for an unfair trial. Let's say, hey, cameras are allowed in the courtroom. The judge says, I'm letting them in. Defense says, we don't want it. The judge will say, over defense objection. It happens. That's an appellate issue later on for a court to say, hey, did cameras in the courtroom affect Kohberger's ability to get a fair trial? Did they affect his trial? And that's an issue. So, his attorneys are making motions that seem ridiculous at times because they have to. They have to preserve the record for appeal. And if they don't do that, this case is coming back for another trial. So as frustrating as it seems and it sounds in some of these arguments, it has to be done. And they have to do that job to make sure that this case, if it does go to trial, which is another issue, that it only goes to trial one time. Now that being said, the defense has to make this motion. They have to cite that case. But they get a little overboard here, and I think they get a little too cute. And if you read here the last part of this argument here, this paragraph after they cite the Estes Supreme Court case I just told you about, defense says Mr. Kohberger is entitled to defend himself against capital criminal charges without cameras focused on his fly, because they're saying that the media they focus the cameras on him, and they've been getting pictures or video of his crotch. When you're defending an individual who is a defendant in a high-profile criminal case like this one, there's nothing more high-profile than this case. You have to sit down with co-counsel, and you have to make an honest assessment of your client's behavior, of his appearance, of the charges. You have to sit down and separate yourself from your client for a minute and say, hey, what does this guy look like to the public? When he comes into court, what is the public thinking? When they see pictures of him, what is the public doing? Does it elicit sympathy, anger, hate, hope? All these different things, these emotions, you have to sit down and discuss them amongst yourselves and come up with a plan. And it's very clear to me that Kohberger's defense team knows that they have a creepiness problem. They do. They put it in their motion to keep cameras out of the courtroom because they are aware of it. Right? There is a creepy vibe here, and once that vibe is established, you can't remove it. So you can't unring a bell, right? They know they have that problem, and they know that he just is not this individual that's going to evoke sympathy. In fact, they probably think it's going to be the exact opposite, and I agree with them. They have a serious creepiness problem. When you have that, your defense of that individual is going to be severely challenged. As I told you in the beginning of the video, the state responds to the defense motion to prohibit cameras in the courtroom, and the state is agreeing with the defense, but not for the reasons that we just went over in this video that are in that motion. The prosecutors here have a very different reason, or there's two reasons why, that they would like cameras removed from the courtroom. Let's go over the first general reason. First thing is, as a prosecutor, you're there to try the case, the facts. You're there to get the conviction based on the evidence. That's your job. That's what moves you forward. It's not a lot about personality. It's not about fanfare, flair. It's about getting the job done. They also know that they're seeking the death penalty, which brings appellate scrutiny up, 100 times. Everything that the state does is scrutinized because you want to execute an individual on conviction. That's what you're doing. You're looking for the death penalty. So what they're saying, the state is saying, we want the guy to have a fair trial. If these cameras are going to prevent that or offer any type of relief for him on conviction, meaning a new trial, we're going to back off and let the court decide. But it's our position that cameras shouldn't be allowed in the courtroom if the defense doesn't want them. But the state puts in in their motion, they put in a very important argument. And it's one that should be considered as much as any of Kohberger's rights as well. And what the state is saying is, we have young witnesses that are going to be testifying to very sensitive things, quadruple homicide. They're speaking specifically about the one roommate who was in the house who's going to have to testify in this case. Maybe the state calls her, the defense calls her. She's going to get up there and she's going to have to give her testimony. And what the prosecutors are worried about is this intense media scrutiny on young folks testifying in the courtroom, specifically the roommate. And I've been in that position before where you're sort of like, hey, you know what, you can really hurt this guy in the media. He looks like this. But as prosecutors, your job is to make sure that a fair trial is conducted. And your job as a prosecutor is not for the publicity and the fanfare and all that, it's to get the job done. So the prosecutors, the state of Idaho in this case, I've been very impressed with a lot of what they've done. And they're playing it safe here. They're saying, if cameras are going to cause this guy to get a new trial, if we get a conviction on a death penalty case, let's keep the cameras out of the courtroom. Stay tuned.